We're on. Okay. New Chumash, new beginning. Let's get started. Be a little different. It's not going to be based on Rashi this week, but we are going to learn something very significant about the Jewish people. So, start off with a verse, a pasuk based on a story in the book of Shmuel. For those of you, Shmuel, yes, the prophet Shmuel. For those of you who know the story very quickly, is that the first king of the Jewish people was Shaul, and he brought gifts. There you go. And Shaul didn't do whatever Hashem wanted him to do. I'm not going to get into what it was. So Hashem tells Shmuel to go tell Shaul that he has revoked his kingdom, and now the kingdom will pass on to someone better than he. And in the story, Shaul, tries to bargain or tries to negotiate or compromise or apologize. And Shmuel says the very famous verse, which is Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, which means, literally translated as, the eternal one of the Jewish people does not lie. And it doesn't change his mind. Once Hashem makes up his mind, there's no changing his mind. Now, those words, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, have been utilized to not only refer to Hashem, but also refer to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are connected to Hashem. The Kabbalah, the Zohar says that there's a three-way Bermuda triangle to the Jewish people in the Torah and God. So the Jewish people are constantly connected to the Torah. So there's a story that took place in the Holocaust. There was a guy who his job was to schlep, I think, stones and he had to move them. And one time the work was too hard, the conditions were too rough. The work was very arduous. The conditions were too difficult. No food, and then he decided that he was going to end it all. He just couldn't take it anymore. And in the storehouse, I think he would either bring the wood or bring the stones. You realize carved into the wood were these words that a previous prisoner had written, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, which means the eternity of the Jewish people is not false, which basically means that the Jewish people, we've been using it now, the Jewish people are an eternal people. You know, we've spoken about this many times. Different civilizations and cultures come and go. Maybe the Jewish people, our dress maybe has changed. Our language might have changed, Aramaic, Yiddish, Ladino, English. But the fact of the matter is, we are still here. There's a famous letter which Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kook, he was the first chief rabbi of Israel. He's known and he writes in his letters, he calls us the Am HaNetzach. You see in text number 1, where are we here? The Am HaNetzach, the Jewish people are called the eternal people, and he writes it over there in the letter. And he says, and he knows their force is merely passing, while he derives strength. There we go. While he derives the strength, eternity, and splendor, with Hashem's might, Jacob will be returned. Those who perished, resurrected. We believe in the coming of Mashiach. So the question is, where do we get this eternity from, or why do we merit this eternity? And that's really what we are going to discuss, and it has to do based on what happens in this week's parsha. So it's a very important question, because a lot of people have, the past few years have turned against the Jewish people. There's a great story with a little Yemenite Jew. The last name is Najjar. You ever heard that name before, Najjar? Actually, I have a.
Peanut butter comes in the jar.
Stop talking. Stop talking. Deep breaths. Deep breaths.
We missed this for a while, didn't we?
No, he didn't.
There's no place like home. So he was a guard. He was a guard of Eichmann during the trial, and they wanted to make sure that Eichmann wasn't smuggled any cyanide pills. So the food was tested by. He was one of his close guards, and they were overwatched. Anyway, so when it came time for the sentence to be carried out for execution, who was going to do it? So they made a goyrel, they made a lot, and the jar was picked. This guy was picked. He wasn't happy, and he was actually walking with his wife, and they pulled up and said, "You got to go," and he went there, and he had to hang him, and he had to cut him down. He had nightmares for a long time because of it, and it was anyway because of the whole experience. He became religious, and later on, some news outlet wanted to interview him about it, and he said, "I'll do an interview on one condition: if we do the interview inside a yeshiva, where there's learning." So they said, "Okay." The Gentiles didn't know what yeshiva was. Yeah, whatever you want. They come to the yeshiva, and you ever see a video of a yeshiva? Guys are learning, and they're screaming, and they're arguing. They said, "Could we go somewhere, quieter?" He said, No, I want everyone to see what Hitler was trying to destroy, what he failed. Jewish life, the Torah. This is what the Jewish vibrancy. That's what it is. So
Hitler was trying to wipe out.
right, exactly.
He did not succeed.
So in this week's parsha, we learn about the birth of the greatest Jew of all time, Moshe Rabbeinu, which is inappropriate to say the famous joke. Right? The teacher says, "I'll give a $5 gift for anybody who tells me who the most famous person of all time is." And one guy says George Washington. He said, "No, it's American, Ben Franklin, all these different people." Finally, Goldberg from the back of the class raises his hand and says, "It's JC. It's Isaiah and Jose." So very good, you get the $5. On the way out, see, I'm surprised a kid with name Goldberg would say that. He said, "Listen, between me and you, it's Moses, but business is business, right?" That's so Moshe Rabbeinu is taught. Actually, by the way, it's interesting. There's actually a connection. I didn't mean to bring this up, but since it came up, because the narrative around the birth of Moshe is very interesting. It says a man went from Levi, and he went and he married a woman from the tribe of Levi, and they conceived and had a child. So why does it say that? I mean, the other children, it doesn't say. It just says Levi had, other children, whatever it is, or usually it doesn't say a man went and married a woman and had a child. So I forgot which commentary says it. He said because for many years, people wanted to teach, or maybe wanted to think that if you're a person of great accomplishments, it's because you have some divine, now we're learning the portion. Paro said he was a god, right? All these people that do great things, it must be that you're special. You're a god. And people would say, "Oh, I'm a god, this way I can do these things." So the Torah says Moshe Rabbeinu was a normal person, a father and a mother, none of this ghosts and sprinkles and sons, regular guy. He's just a person that maximized his capabilities to the fullest. Like what they say about Einstein only used 10% of his brain. That's just, but it's not true, by the way. He used 100% of his brain. No one uses 10% of their brain.
There are some people I can think of that do.
Right.
If they get that high.
Right. So Moshe was born. It says Vayar. It said Vatera. Sorry, that Moshe's mother saw that he was good. So what did she see? Was he a good-looking kid? I mean, what a mother says, this one's good, I'll take him. This one, nah, I'll leave him here.
Oh,
So-
you were listening to your mother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what does she see? So Rashi quotes the famous Gemara inside. This is text number 2. The famous Gemara inside which says that when Moshe was born, the entire home was filled with light. Now you might ask, where did the Gemara get that from? How do you know it was light? Maybe he was born with what's that saying? You're born with a silver spoon in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you know? So the Gemara says, because when in the first day of creation, he used the exact same phrase for light, and God saw that the light was good. So when it says that, and she saw it was good, it means light. Okay. You know something that's beautiful, that Moshe's mother gave birth to her child, and the room was full with light. Wonderful. Okay. Nice. What? Why?
We
Well,
had three.
they needed it for the screenplay for the Ten Commandments.
Right.
There weren't 3 people trying to sell some spice in the.
I don't know. No, I
No,
guess
it
not.
wasn't that one.
So, and also, let's say Moshe was very special. Okay, but what is it going to do with me? So you want to tell me Moshe was an amazing person? Thank you. First of all, what's the lesson? How does it apply? How does it apply there? Okay, so now let's get into. If I were to ask you, what is Moshe synonymous with? When you think of Moshe, what do you think of?
The 10 Commandments.
The Torah,
The Torah. 10 Commandments is part of Torah.
a great leader.
Okay, but Torah. Right? When you think of Moshe, you think of Torah. What's Moshe's greatest accomplishment? That he gave it to Torah.
Well, he communicated face to face with Hashem.
But only because he served as a messenger to deliver the Torah to us. That's why. In fact, in Parshat Kisisa, when the Jewish people sin with the golden calf, Hashem tells them, Moshe, descend. Because the Jewish people, they descended, they went down, and they lowered themselves with sin. That causes a descent in your stature as well. Moshe is synonymous with Torah. Now, what is Torah known for? So I'll answer that question with a famous Yemim. Yemim day to day with the previous Rebbe writes. The Rebbe compiled it of sayings of the teachings of the previous Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe says there are 2 types of laws. There are laws that are created from life and laws that create life. Laws that are created from life, because life is different in different lands, so the laws are different in different lands, and the laws change based on the culture. But laws that are created from life are the laws created from Torah. And it's the same law all through the generations, wherever it is. And that is truth. Truth means if I tell you something, and it's true now, but it's not true later, then it's not true. The Rebbe would have this discussion, mostly via letters. When people would say to the Rebbe, how can you say this, or how can the Torah say this, when it's a scientific fact that we know for sure it's different. The Rebbe said, we don't know, it's not a fact, it's an hypothesis. It's our understanding until now. Science understanding is changing all the time. It's not a fact. It's what we understand now. That's not true. If it changes, it's not true. True means it is, it was, and it'll always be. That's true. So the Torah, Hashem is truth. The Torah is truth. So when are the Jewish people eternal? When they're connected to the Torah. No, we're going to. I know. You think it's a lot. But Purim is in less than 2 months. Purim is less than 2 months. So the what really happened in the story of Purim? The story of Purim was the Jewish people usually merit supernatural protection, right? Because eternity is supernatural. Everything natural has a beginning and an end. Jewish people are supernatural, so we're here always. But the Jewish people decided that they not to invest in the supernatural protection, but instead to invest in the protection of Achashverosh and whatever it was. So God said, okay, you want nature to take its course. What happens naturally? Bigger countries or bigger peoples, cultures, swallow, consume, and overtake other cultures, right? So you see, text number 3, the Talmud Yerushalmi says it says the evil empire flourishes when Jewish people hurl terror to the ground. What is the source? Is he cast truth to the ground, and it will do and prosper. Like it says in the Neil, truth can only refer to terror. So when the Jewish people are connected to Torah, great. She says, and when they cast the Torah to the ground, when they disassociate from Torah, then they're well, anything can happen. Now, it's interesting in the comment. It says the Torah is true. Everything else, everything's false. Like if you look at the Tzaddik HaKohen, Tzaddik, he says over here. He says, he says the world is called Alma de Shikra, a false world. Why? Not because it's necessarily evil, it's because it's not eternal. Jewish people were in the long game. You know, if you're in and you're out, that's not true. Eternal means that that's the way it is. So and as the Ralbag says in text 5b, he says something that's true can't be. This is on text 8, on page 8. Something true will always be correct and proper, cannot be reversed. However, something false can exist for a while, but it's fleeting, and it can't last long. And there are many stories like this. Something that's good and true will always win out the day. Falsehood and evil, it might seem like very, very powerful, but in the end, it doesn't. In fact, in the laws of mikveh, there's something called lying waters, mayim kazuvim, deceitful waters. You ever heard of those? You ever heard of that before? Deceitful waters. You ever heard of that before?
What?
So according to halacha, a person has to go to a mikveh in mayim chayim, living waters. Okay, but let's say the water is not mayim chayim. Okay, it's not kosher for a mikveh. Now, usually you go to a river. A river is mayim chayim, right? It's flowing.
Uh-huh.
But
What about a lake?
A lake could be a little bit of an issue because it's standing
depends.
still.
I think it depends. If a river flows into the lake,
Yeah, I'm saying if it's yeah.
Well,
So-
what about all these lakes in Pembroke
Okay,
Pines?
we're not.
those are man-made.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not. One second. Let's.
What are you talking about?
No, I'm not. I was talking about a river. You're talking about a lake. Okay. So, anyway, so the Gemara says, but if the river dries up once in 7 years, then it's called deceitful waters. On the surface, it looks like it, but because it comes and goes, then you can't use it. You can't use it as a kosher mikveh. So that's how the Torah defines truth. Truth means it always is. Look at laws, right? Let's take for example shechita, ritual slaughter. There were times that was the most humane. Then sometimes they decided it's barbaric. Then now they're back to it's humane. You know. That's why the way our attitude is, you guys can knock your head against the wall. We're gonna keep, the famous story with the Kuzari story. You not familiar with the Kuzari story? You never heard of the Kuzari?
It doesn't make any.
Doesn't ring any bells?
Doesn't ring a bell.
What
The
if
story
I
might. But
What
the
if
name,
I bang the bell really hard?
It depends on what you hit it with.
Oh, okay.
A wet noodle, no.
Yeah.
A hammer, yes.
Okay. So the story is there was a king who wanted to adopted a religion away from paganism. So he called in a Christian, and he asked him all these questions, and he said, "Let me ask you a question. If there was no Christianity, what would you be?" He said, "I'd be a Jew." Okay. Then he called in a Muslim, and he asked him all these questions. Say, "You weren't a Muslim. What would you be?" He said, "I'd be a Jew." So he didn't think to ask a Jew. The story happened like over 1,000 years ago. The Jews were downtrodden and abused. So he called in a rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, a riddle. He tells a story, and he asked her, and I asked rabbis questions, and he said, "Let me ask you a question, Rabbi. How come you guys never progressed? How come you guys never adopted Christianity?" And so he says, "I'll tell you something. There's a whole big argument in the world what's true, right? The New Testament, the Quran, everybody's arguing. But the consensus is about the Old Testament. So until they get it all figured out and the dust settles, we're just going to stay with the Old Testament. And then when we find out that there's reason to believe something else is true, then we'll invest. But for now, we're sticking with the shore bet, right? That's what emes is. Emes is, truth is, it's always that way. If it comes and goes, then it's not true. And you see that the Gemara says something interesting. It says here you go. The Gemara in Saned says something interesting. So Rabbi Katina says the world will exist for 6,000 years, followed by destruction. And it says now what does it mean? Hashem's going to destroy the world. What do we believe in Armageddon? There's going to be volcanoes and I don't know, or lava and tsunamis. Is that
Calling Arnold Schwarzenegger to save the world.
Was there a movie like that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's called End of Days.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So the Ben Yehoyada, a Iraqi rabbi. We don't always get to quote Iraqi rabbis. It's called the Ben Yishchai. It's a famous Iraqi rabbi in the turn of the 20th century. He says in text 6b, it doesn't mean that actually Hashem is going to destroy the world. That's not what it means. What it means is that everything we've taken for granted, as this is the way it is for 6,000 years, it's going to be replaced with a new and improved, beautiful environment with no negative properties. There'll be no grief, mourning, suffering, and no negativity. Instead, there'll only be good and wonderful and heavenly delights. That's it. So everything you know now is going to change, which means, let's say for example, let's take medicine for example. 100 years ago, if a person got a certain disease, typhoid, 100 years ago, not so much, 150 years ago, right? Person got typhoid, dead. Or what's the other one?
Bubonic.
The bubonic, but the one anyway.
That was spread by rats.
Yeah, the black plague, whatever it is, right?
Bubonic plague.
Yeah, but say whatever it is, pick a disease, right? A person got 100 years ago, tight, goodbye, and that was a fact. The fact was there's no way, but does that mean there's no cure because you don't know? No. So what the Gemara is saying is our whole reality, which we think it is, it's not a true reality. What's a reality? Torah. Torah is the one thing that hasn't changed. And what are we going to do when Mashiach comes? We're going to learn Torah. We're going to delve deeper, like the Rambam says, text 7a. He says one thing's for sure: the Torah and the commandments will remain forever, without change and without any addition or subtraction. We're not going to invent new halachas. Not going to be new mitzvahs that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? At the end of Rambam, we're coming up, by the way, tonight, it's very special. We're talking about the Rambam. Tonight's a very special night. Tonight is the Yartzeit of the Rambam, 20th of Tevis. It's a very special night. The Rambam, and we're coming close to the end of the cycle of learning Rambam. And all the way at the end of Rambam, he says, all the Jewish people, the wise people, and the tzaddikim and the prophets, what do you think they wanted Mashiach to come for? They didn't want we can have world power. It's not what it's about. It's only that we should be able to sit, learn Torah, and do mitzvahs, and that's it. That's what it's about. And like the Abarbanel, and the Abarbanel is someone who can write this, because the Abarbanel lived at the time of the expulsion from Spain, right? And everybody at that time, you had the Muslims in North Africa, and you had the Christians there, and everyone was saying the Jewish people are false, and the Torah has changed, right? What's the argument they come and they tell us? Why should we abandon Torah and Yiddishkeit, Chas v'Shalom? They say because there's a new covenant, right? Something's changed. And what do you write? Text 7b. No, the Torah in our hands is eternal. It can't be changed at any time. In fact, Hashem writes it in Torah. It is because the eternal God created it according to His unlimited wisdom. Torah is relevant to every person at every time because Hashem's knowledge is not limited to any particular time frame. That means when Hashem says in the Torah something, it wasn't talking to them only; He's talking to you. One of the questions Alter Rebbe talks about in Tanya, his famous question is, Moshe asked this question. He said, come on, guys. What is Hashem asking you already? Just fear Him and do everything He says. The Gemara says, why does Moshe make it like, what's the big deal? Right? It seems like a very big deal. So the Gemara answers, for Moshe it was no big deal. So Alter Rebbe says, what kind of answer is that? But Moshe wasn't talking to himself, he was talking to us. It wasn't only talking to the Jews then, he was talking to the Jews now. In fact, the famous story with Alter Rebbe when the minister walked into the minister of education walked into a cell and asked, Alter Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, I want to ask you a question. Why does God ask Adam after he ate from the tree of knowledge where he is in the Garden of Eden? So the Alter Rebbe started giving the answer, but Rashi says that Hashem wanted to enter into the conversation gently, didn't want to walk in, screaming. So the guy said, I know what Rashi says. I want to hear what the Rebbe says. The Rebbe said, let me ask you a question. Do you believe the Torah is eternal and it speaks to every person, every time, in every place? The minister smiled. The minister thought, for a moment. And he said, I do. I believe that. And Alter Rebbe smiled because he realized that he won. The eternity of the Torah won. And he said, okay, this is how it applies to us. God is asking Adam, every human being, where are you? That's what he's saying. Where are you? What are you accomplishing in life? What are you doing with your life? He said a person lives a certain amount of years, days, months, and he said the exact age of the minister. So what have you done with your life? What have you bought another car, another suit? I mean, the Torah applies to every single person at every time. So now you know why the Jewish people who embrace the Torah are eternal, because the Torah is eternal, and Hashem gives us the choice. By the way, we see this in this. Well, it's not really in this week's parsha. It's more in a few weeks. Only a part of the Jewish people left Egypt. Remember that detail? Only a part. Why didn't the other people leave? Remember?
Lack of faith.
They didn't want. So they decided to disassociate themselves from Torah and the Jewish people. What happened to them?
They're gone.
They're gone.
Know.
Exactly. Why are we sitting here in Pembroke Pines in 2026? Because our parents and grandparents associated with Torah. The only way you can ensure eternity is if you're connected to something eternal. See, like the TV has to be on, to be plugged into the power source. If not, it turns off. That's the way. The Torah is eternity.
It's plugged in.
It's eternity. That's what makes us. It's not because we're smart. Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, you're not that much greater than everyone else. You're not smarter, you're not bigger, you're not mightier. Some people think, Jewish people are around because we're good at business, we're good bankers, or we're good with technology, or we're good doctors, we're good lawyers. You think we're the only ones to, Benjamin Franklin wasn't a Yid. He was a very smart person. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't a Yid. Very smart person. I mean, you think brains only run through the Jewish people? A person's a fool to think that the state of Israel, the Jewish people are around because we're somehow superior intellectually or physically. We're definitely not better physically, right? It's not why. It's because of the Torah. And the Rebbe would say this, going back to Israel. This is the problem with Israel when they had this whole discussion about ownership or the right to be there. If you go to them and you start with these arguments, these human logical arguments, you're going to lose. So because they'll argue. How can you do it? You chase them out. All these different things. They'll find a precedent. But you go to them and say, the eternal God gave the land to us. Over. That's the way it is. That's the way it was. And it's not changing. Whether or not, by the way, we're in the land or not. It's not eternity. Like, I mean, if something is, it's not a good example. But like, let's go back to the Christian Muslim idea, right? What do they come and say? They come and say that Torah doesn't belong to you anymore, right? God rejected you. It goes against the whole idea of an eternal God. So you're saying God changes His mind? I mean, doesn't make any sense. The eternal God gave His eternal Torah and the only way you can do it is if you decide to invest in that eternity. It's very simple. It's not.
Rocket science.
By the way, this lady called me up this week. I was in a bad mood. I wasn't in a bad
I can
mood.
tell by the mug you got.
Yeah, actually, by the way, I was in the ground. You saw my new present? It's perfect.
He said, well, you'll look at it, you'll want one.
So she
don't know.
called me. She called me when I guess I didn't even realize I was grumpy.
Oh, that's funny.
Grumpy.
Who gave you that?
That's anyway. So I didn't even realize I was grumpy. So the lady calls me up. She says, I want my son to have a good bar mitzvah and everything else. She says, I know, the kid's 12 or turning 12. So I know it's a little late. A little late. Or maybe I can say, he said, a few months. I said, a few months, 12 years. I mean, what do you expect? I once saw an interview. You know, one of the greatest shooters in basketball, Steph Curry. You ever heard of this guy?
Steph Curry?
The guy can shoot the basketball from anywhere. The guy's unbelievable. So I once saw, not an interview, I think he was reading questions. He was reading questions, and the guy said, he read a question from the audience. He said, the question was, how can we shoot like you? So he said, you can't. So, because unless you start from 4 or 5 years old and you practice muscle memory, right? I mean, it's, people want to complicate the issue. It's not complicated. If you want your kids to be proud Jews, you got to invest. You want your kids to, you want to have a family of eternity. You invest. You invest in eternity. And the Rebbe says something interesting, by the way. The Rebbe quotes a crazy medrash. When Hashem created the world, it says Adam and Chava were supposed to live. No, how long? Forever, right? And Hashem said, "And the day you eat from the tree of knowledge, you will die." So the Rebbe says, based on a medrash, the Rebbe is quoting medrash, that when the Jewish people received the Torah, they in their own, and Adam and Chava brought death into the world, but in their own sort of cocoon, the angel of death wasn't going to touch them. Jewish people are going to live forever. But then when they sinned with the golden calf, they invited back the angel of death back. Look at text number 8. It's a crazy, it's a wild idea. And he says, Hashem gave us a Torah and liberated us from the grip of death. By giving us a Torah here on earth, He endowed us with the measure of eternality. Because Torah is eternal. What's death? I'm asking a question. Let's take death for example, right? Is death a fact of life? Yes or no? So you answer, yeah, right? Nothing, right? Two.
Cycle of life.
Who said it? The 2 guarantees in life are death and taxes, right?
Taxes.
Shiach comes, it's not going to be death. It's still going to be taxes.
Yeah, who did?
It'll still be taxes.
Still be taxes, right? But so why do we say death is a fact of life? Because that's the way we become accustomed to it. But if you look at the Torah, when the world was created, was death a fact of life? No. That means it's not a fact of life. It's something that was invited in, so to speak, was brought upon us by the Adam and Chava, which means it can be disassociated, eliminated. That's fact. The Navi says, Mashiach comes, Bila Mavas Lanatzach. Death will be swallowed up forever. I mean, we've been so programmed that this is the way it is that we can't imagine something else. And it's true that like you go to the story of when Moshe hits the rock, right? So in a few weeks Moshe hits the rock twice. In the first year and the 40th year. And in the 40th year, after Miriam dies, the rock stops giving water, and they can't find the rock. And they go to Moshe and say, we can't find the rock. What are we going to do? So Moshe says, what, you really think it's the rock? You become so programmed that I don't have this rock. Right? You can't get water. If Hashem wants, I'll give you from a different rock. Right? It's almost like a baby. I have to have an apple juice in a certain cup. You become so programmed, you don't realize that that's not the reality. So that's why Mashiach comes. There's not going to be death. If you want to know the way the world's supposed to be, it's the way when Adam and Chava were created. It's not some utopian and idealistic and fluffy, rainbowy, it's an impossible dream. No, that's the reality. Way it's supposed to be. What happened was we as humanity, we went and corrupted it. So once it's cleansed and refined and put back in order, the world's going to function the way it is. So the Jewish people, they said Nasa v'nishma, and they said we will do and we will hear. And they said, Hashem, we take your Torah. So what happened? There was no death, because death is not natural. That sounds crazy what I'm saying, but death is an end. And that's not, the neshama is supposed to be forever. So even as we resided in physical bodies, subject to aging and decay, we would live forever, free from the angel of death. However, when this became undone, when they served the golden calf, and they had the stench, this bad smell of sin. So Torah, because when they were totally absorbed with Torah, death couldn't have a handle on them. But once they absorbed sin, then there was the story, the Gemara says, learning Tanya, that one of the greatest Jews of all time was Rabbah. Remember, this was back in chapter 1 of Tanya. Rabbah, it says, when the angel of death wanted to come, two people, the Gemara tells us two stories like this, one King David and one Rabbah, just to tell you what level this Rabbi was. When the angel of death wanted to come take his neshama, he couldn't approach him. Why? Because Rabbah didn't stop learning Torah. And Torah is life. Up there. Eitz Chaim Hi. It says on top of the ark. It's the tree of life. And when a person is attached to Torah, the angel of death couldn't approach him. So they had to he made a whole shturim, a commotion, and he distracted him for a moment, and that's how he got his neshama, the Gemara says. Okay. So now let's go take it a little, let's get back to Moshe. So for a normal person, let's call it normal or regular person, whatever you want to call it. A person starts off like a blank sheet, right? And if the guy does well in school, and that was so a clip. A guy says the boss says to an employee, says, "You see this car?" Says, "That's what happens when you work hard." The employee says, "Are you saying if I work hard, I can get a car like that?" He says, "No, I'm saying if you work hard, I can get another car like that." Right? So most of us look at, life as a blank sheet, right? Everyone's born at the same starting line. If person learns and they work hard, and then their body becomes more of a conduit and more transparent to let their soul shine through. That's how we think about it, right? No one's born amazing. Everyone has to work hard. But the problem is that would mean that's not true. But what's true? True means they're always like that. So Moshe is synonymous with truth. What do we say? Moshe emes, the famous line, Moshe emes, v'sarasa emes. Moshe is true, and his Torah is true. That means it's not that Moshe had to work. I mean, he still had to work to realize his capabilities and his capacity. But he was born already where his body was already a channel, a conduit. That's why in the Parshat this week, when Moshe is crying because he's hungry, and who takes him out of the river? Paro's daughter, and she knows the baby's hungry, so she tries to get a wet nurse. And who does she call? She calls Egyptians, whatever, Cleopatra's, and I don't know any other Egyptian woman's name. But yeah, right? Nefti, right? And Moshe doesn't want a nurse. Hashem does not let Moshe nurse from the woman. In fact, you should know, it's a crazy medrash. I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time. Should I say it? Okay, I'll say.
Skip every other word, that's all.
Yeah. Okay. There's a crazy medrash that says, you know that Moshe had a speech impediment.
Well, wasn't that because he had his tongue burned?
But why?
Yeah.
But why? Why did he have his
Because-
tongue burned?
Because Pharaoh didn't like.
I know the story how. I didn't ask you the how. I asked you why.
Why?
Hashem
he
didn't
spoke
want him
truth.
to go for the gold because then
That's
it would be-
no. You're into the how. But so the Medrash says. Well, no. The Medrash says is that when Batya brought an Egyptian woman to nurse Moshe, some drops of tummy milk went onto his lips or his tongue, and he had to kasher his kasher his mouth. That's what the Medrash says. Meaning, it was the idea of libun. But I'm trying to say is that Moshe already from the beginning. Look at text 9. He says that the beginning of the text, the entire home filled with light, is that already from the time of birth, Moshe was worthy of receiving the Torah. And this is what truth is in text number 10. So it is, it was, and it will always be. And there's a famous Gemara in Baba Basra. Famous Gemara in Baba Basra, text number 10. 11. It says there was Rabba Barachana. It's in chapter 5, I think. Yeah, about chapter 5 of Baba Basra is a great chapter. There's a bunch of crazy stories, wild stories. And one of the stories, Rabba Barachana once met an Arab in the desert. He said, "Come, I'm going to show you where Korach and his henchmen are there." And he brought him to a space. See, and I saw two rifts in the ground. And the Arab asked me, "What do I hear?" So he says, "I hear Moshe v'saras emes. Moshe and his Torah are true, and we are liars." What are they trying to say? Because they came to Korach. Korach came to Moshe and said, "Who died and made you king?" Moshe says, "It's not me, it's God." And they rebelled against it. But everything Moshe did was truth. You see, the Medrash Mechilta says, Moshe dedicated his entire life to Torah. That's why, by the way, what's Moshe's greatest moment as leader?
Oh, when he lost his shoes at the burning bush.
It was stolen by Palestinian.
Yeah, by
Yeah.
Palestinian.
This greatest moment is when Hashem says, "I'm going to destroy the Jewish people." Moshe says, "If they go, I go with them. Take me out of your Torah." Can you imagine? Moshe is synonymous with Torah. Moshe loved the Jewish people more than anything else. He says, if you're going to destroy the Jewish people, that means you take me out. And that's why, interesting. How does it apply today? It says the famous Gemara in Saita, based on text 13 only quotes a little bit, based on various verses, which makes it sound like Moshe's death wasn't past, but it was present continuous. Moshe's present is continuous. So the Gemara says, just like Moshe was asking and beseeching Hashem on behalf of the Jewish people then, he's doing the same now. The Rebbe comes and asks, what does that mean? Moshe didn't die. So he says, So the Rebbe says in text 14, the sages taught that Moshe never died, means if his nature, even his physical nature was truth, then his earthly presence couldn't end and die. Truth is eternal, even in the physical world. This means the Moshe's soul integration into leaders, that every single generation has a neshama of Moshe. Their job is to lead the Jewish people, and it says, Gemara says. I know we're coming back to Purim. It says Mordechai in his generation was like Moshe in his generation. So that says, and this is the idea. If you want to, we all have a Moshe inside of us. If you want to be connected to Torah, to the Eibishter, to eternity, you have to set time in your day to study Torah. And there's no such thing as you're too busy. I can give you examples of busiest people in history, and they carved out time. You could. The question is finding out right venue. It used to be you had to go to a class and you had to sit there and listen to a guy speak. Not everybody could learn that way, but now you have video, you have audio, you can read. Right? You still listening to your right? Barbara is a biblical scholar now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is the way it is. If you want to be connected to eternity, to the Jewish people, you have to learn Torah. It's not a punishment. If you don't learn Torah, you're going to be lost to time. That's just the reality. Think about it. When you go into yeshiva, listen to what the Bachrim, the boys say. Look at what the young guys say. Rashi says, not Rashi said. The Gemara says. Rabbi Akiva is saying. There's a great story, by the way. There was a rabbi in Montreal. His name was Rabbi Pinchas Hirschfeld. And he had photographic memory. And he knew the entire Gemara by heart. One time a boy got up to give a little, it's called a pilpul, a little speech. Right? And bringing pilpul is, you bring various sources. And so Rabbi Hirschfeld came over to him afterwards and he said, by the way, I don't remember exact names. He said, you quoted Abaya. Abaya didn't say that. It was Rava. So the boy said, Rabbi, come on. Stop busting my chops. Abaya, Rava, what's the big deal? The point is the idea. So Rabbi Hirschfeld says, no, it does make a big deal. It says, because it says in the Gemara that when you say Torah in the name of somebody, the rabbi who you're quoting is saying it along with you. And here you go, and you say Abaya said it, and Abaya sitting there in Shemaim said, Kemel nish gesagt. They never said such a thing. What I'm trying to say is that Rabbi Akiva says, Rashi says, the Rambam says, the Torah is eternal. It's not one time. It's not a history book. No, I always like to repeat that when we were kids, we weren't allowed to say, what subject are we learning? The teacher would scream at us and say, history is a subject. Math is a subject. Torah is a way of life. It's not a book you put on the shelf and that's it. You read it. Right? Look at all the books I read. You go to a lawyer, right? All the books I read, look at it, right? It's not, the Rebbe said, you go into a Jewish person's house, the books have to be, worn and creased, and the pages have to be, dog-eared. That's Torah's life. Torah's life. If you have a book, right? Whatever book or novel or whatever it is you like, I'm saying, you fold it, you can tell, you carry it around with you.
That's what's wrong with my Kindle. I keep breaking it.
Yeah, you keep trying to fold the Kindle.
Trying to fold it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, but that's the way it is. If you want to be an eternal people, you got to make time to learn Torah. And like I said, everyone should connect to the eternity of Torah. All right, key points. Oh, we did this already.
Tired?
Boys. Key points. Torah is eternal and unchanging. What is true today will always be true. What is true here is true everywhere. What is true for one is true for all. It's not different Torahs. It's for everybody. Only Hashem and His Torah are entirely true. Everything else is subject to change. And therefore, false. False again doesn't mean bad. False means temporary. Anything False said has no power over truth. Thus, no nature. It reminds me. Once saw a clip of a show, movie. I don't know. It's a clip. It's very funny. The guy goes into a store and he picks up a cashmere sweater. How much is it? It's like $20. I don't remember. It's $20. Why is it so cheap? The guy said, "Oh, there's a tiny red mark over there. It's barely noticeable." The guy turns to his friend and says, "What do you think? Can you see the dot?" She says, "Yeah, I can see the dot." "Yeah, but imagine you didn't know about the dot. Can you see the dot?" He said, "Once I know about the dot, I cannot see it," right? That's the whole comedy bit. Truth is truth. Once the truth is true, reminds me of another story. Sorry, I have until 8:30. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz lived in the 1600s, 1500s, I can't remember. I think he lived in Amsterdam. He bounced around because he was no nonsense. The community don't like rabbis like that. Off camera, I'll tell you something else I told to this person. All right, I don't think she's going. So he bounced around because he was only truth, no games. But he was a child prodigy, a crazy genius. When he was a kid, the king heard about this Jewish child prodigy, invited him to the palace. Comes to the palace, and the king asked him. He said, "How did find your way to the palace?" "Yeah, I took a taxi, a wagon, whatever." So the king asked Innocent, said, "How did you? What if there was no taxi? What if there was no wagon? How did you get here?" He said, "I asked for directions." The king asks, "But how do you know that guy is right? What if he's leading you in the wrong path?" So Rabbi Innocent says, "I'll ask a second person. But what if that second person gives you other directions?" So he says, "I'll ask a third person, and I'll see if two people tell me one, then I know the majority is right." The king said, if that's the case, if the majority is right, the majority in Europe are Christians, in the world are Christian, they're Jewish people, they're minorities, so obviously we're right. And everybody in the king's court was like, the king outsmarted the big, child. So when the whole commotion died down, Rabbi Innocent said, that analogy only works if you don't know the way to the palace. But if you know the way to the palace, no matter how many people tell you you're going the wrong way, you know you're right because you're on the right path. That was the end of the conversation, right? All right. That's truth. Everyone can tell you you're false, but the truth is truth. Truth doesn't change. That's the obnoxious thing about truth. Once you say it, it is. Thus, no nation has power over us when the last line of number 2. When we embrace the Torah, when we embrace the Torah, we have hope. If not, all is lost. When we embrace the Torah, we observe a measure of eternality and become the eternal nation. Going back to the story of Purim, what happened? They bought into the protection of Achashverosh. It failed. They did the Shuvah. They bought back into Torah. God said, "Okay, now you're playing game. Now you're now you're paying me protection like the mob, right? Now you pay me protection. All right." Okay, God forbid. But if we only study in a way, it's fully absorbing. For us to be absorbed in Torah and the Torah absorbed in us, it must become a highest priority. We must turn in morning and night. It can't just be something you do here and there. That's who you are. It's true you have to work, and you have to eat and you have to sleep, but that's not the core of who you are. The core of who you are is to learn Torah. Judaism is the core of who you are. And then Hashem created you that you have to work and you have to eat, but that's not who you are. This is especially critical at times of war when we're attacked by enemies. At such times, we must ensure that Jewish students are constantly studying Torah, and we study Torah. I remember in 1991, in the Gulf War, the people came to the Rebbe and said, "Should we bring our kids home from Israel?" My brother actually was in Israel in Kfar Chabad. So they weren't worried about Jerusalem and Tel Aviv because those are important cities, but a city like Bnei Brak, which is all yeshivas, my parents were worried. Should I bring my kid home? And remember the gas masks and everything else. So I said nothing to worry about. Bnei Brak is a city of Torah. God will protect it. It's everything's going to be okay. And that's the message. You have to make time to learn Torah. So don't be lazy. Get started. L'chaim. Don't bother me.
Nope.
Nope.